Senator Mazie Hirono spent several minutes laying out the progressive case: poll taxes, literacy tests, jelly bean counting, voter suppression happening right now, the SAVE Act, the Attorney General demanding voter rolls from 29 states, the Supreme Court's conservative majority gutting the Voting Rights Act. She asked a witness to put this moment into the historical context of John Lewis and the Pettus Bridge.
Mr. Cox, can you put this current moment into historical context for us? For instance, why is this moment reminiscent of when the last Congressman, John Lewis, who many of us consider a friend and hero, led over 600 peaceful protesters across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama?
Then Senator Ted Cruz got the floor, and he didn't argue about current voter suppression. He went back in time. He took her words. We had poll taxes, we had literacy tests, and asked a devastating question. Who is we? The Democrats. Every single racist policy she named was implemented by Democrats. The KKK, Democrats. Jim Crow, Democrats. Bull Connor, Democrat. He contrasted that with the Republican Party, founded to oppose slavery. Lincoln, the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments.
Party. Who was the first Republican president?
Abraham Lincoln.
The Republican Party was literally founded to oppose slavery. We came into existence because slavery was a grotesque evil, and it was President Lincoln, the first Republican president, who signed the Emancipation Proclamation, who won the Civil War, and that resulted in the freeing of the slaves and the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments.
Then he listed black Republicans elected in majority white districts: Tim Scott, Burgess Owens, Byron Donalds, John James, Wesley Hunt, and himself, the first Hispanic ever elected to the Senate from Texas. All elected statewide, no gerrymandering required. Hirono snapped. She invoked Dianne Feinstein. She told Cruz to stop lecturing. Cruz's response? I knew Dianne Feinstein. I served with Dianne Feinstein. And you're not Dianne Feinstein. This is not a hearing about gerrymandering anymore. It's a fight about who owns the history of civil rights. Let's watch.
Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's absolutely no question that racial discrimination existed in our country, and in many places, people would argue that it still does. And so we had all kinds of ways to keep black people from voting. We had poll taxes, we had literacy tests, we had, I think some places even required them to count how many jelly beans were in a jar. All kinds of ways to keep black people from voting. This happened. I don't think anybody can deny that that was going on. And as far as I'm concerned, there is a pattern now of voter suppression going on in our country right now. And the Calais decision just plays into that by pretty much gutting the Voting Rights Act, which, by the way, was reaffirmed many times in a bipartisan way in acknowledging that this kind of racial discrimination occurred, and that as a democratic country where everybody has an equal vote, that's not tolerable. But suddenly it's A-OK just because the Supreme Court says so. No, it's not the entire Supreme Court. It's a 63 majority, which I consider to be basically an out-of-control Supreme Court majority where there is a pattern of this kind of decisions out of this court. So just because this court says so doesn't mean I agree with them. So meanwhile, there is voter suppression going on. You have an attorney general who sued at least 29 states to get these states to turn over their voter rolls. Why? What does the Department of Justice, what does the executive branch want to do with all this voter information? Up to no good, I would say. There's this huge push to pass the SAVE Act. It's more Save Trump Act. And what does that act do? It would require millions and millions, all of us who are registered to vote, suddenly we will have to show proof of citizenship, either through a birth certificate or a passport. Millions of people don't have either. Married people who take their partner's name will not have a name that matches their birth certificate. So what are they going to do? There are going to be millions of people who are not even going to register to vote. And you think Trump doesn't know that? Of course he does. That's why he wants the SAVE Act to be enacted. That's why the Republicans would like to see the SAVE Act enacted, because they know that millions of people will be literally disenfranchised by not even being able to allow to vote. And then with this regime, once you do vote, they will challenge your vote as they did in the last elections. So voter suppression is going on. It's very reminiscent to the kind of stuff that was going on that the Voting Rights Act was intended to address, to fix. And now you have a Supreme Court that says, oh, never mind all of that, never mind all of that history. And over 3 cases, they succeeded in gutting the Voting Rights Act. And don't tell me that the provisions of the Voting Rights Act still exist in a way that is pretty much unenforceable, because the racial gerrymandering is going to be okay unless the legislative body that does the gerrymandering says, oh, by the way, we intend to racially discriminate. Are you crazy? You think that state legislators are going to be that overt about it? Of course not. So you have a Voting Rights Act that you claim is still intact. Please, give me a break. I have a question for Mr. Cox. Last weekend, thousands of people, and apparently you were among them, gathered to protest the Supreme Court's gutting of the Voting Rights Act. The central locations for these protests were Montgomery and Selma, Alabama, and both significant sites in American civil rights history. Mr. Cox, can you put this current moment into historical context for us? For instance, why is this moment reminiscent of when the last Congressman, John Lewis, who many of us consider a friend and hero, led over 600 peaceful protesters across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama?
Thank you, Senator Hirono, for that question. I think it's reminiscent and reflects the fact that the Voting Rights Act was not given to us. It was not bestowed on us. It really came from the people. And the joke I'm sort of making is that Justice O'Connor used to say there were more lawyers in D.C. than people. I think we sometimes feel that way in D.C. We're on the Hill. Lawyers are at the center of the universe, and that's just not true. If we're going to climb out of this destruction of the Voting Rights Act, the penultimate destruction of our democracy, it's going to require the people. And quite frankly, we're being gaslit. We have a Supreme Court, we have allies of the Supreme Court and allies of the Calais case saying discrimination is over. Obviously not true. We have folks on the ground showing and discussing with us that law enforcement are at the polling places. We have folks not only confused, but being discriminated against right now. And I have to say that to ignore the fact that the people are demanding that Congress respond, that Congress restore the effects test that has been gutted and taken out by Calais would be a mistake. Because folks understand and know what is happening outside in the real world. And they know, particularly black voters know, that they aren't going to return to the 1800s and what we all experienced, or our ancestors experienced, that led us to the Voting Rights Act in the first place.
There is so much more to say, but I fear my time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would point out that my colleague from Hawaii questions whether or not people would be overtly discriminatory in the words that they would say. I will just point out to the California map maker who said the number one thing he was focused on was creating a racially gerrymandered district. So people do say it. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a moment ago, our colleague, Senator Hirono, said there's a lot more to say, and indeed, she's right. And in fact, I want to go back to her comments. She began by saying we have a long history of racial discrimination in this country. That's undoubtedly correct. And then she said, quote, we had poll taxes, we had literacy tests, we even had tests of how many jelly beans are in a jar. Mr. Chamberlain, when Senator Hirono says we had poll taxes, I want to ask you who we is, and in particular, what party was it that implemented poll taxes in the South?
And I don't want to necessarily speak in every single case, but I'm pretty confident it was mostly the Democrats.
And what party was it that put literacy tests in place in the South?
Same answer, mostly the Democrats.
And what party was it that had tests like how many jelly beans are in a bottle?
The Democrats.
Tell me, what party were the founders of the Ku Klux Klan from?
I'm pretty sure that was the Democrats.
Indeed. In fact, Nathan Bedford Forrest, the founder of the Klan, was a delegate to the 1860 Democrat National Convention. What party wrote the Jim Crow laws in the South?
The Democrats.
And so on this side of the aisle were members of the Republican Party. Who was the first Republican president?
Abraham Lincoln.
The Republican Party was literally founded to oppose slavery. We came into existence because slavery was a grotesque evil, and it was President Lincoln, the first Republican president, who signed the Emancipation Proclamation, who won the Civil War, and that resulted in the freeing of the slaves and the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. By the way, fast forward to the Civil Rights era. Bull Connor, one of the most noxiously racist politicians. What party was he from?
He was a Democrat.
The Democrats, for the entire history of their party, have been a party based on racial discrimination. They affirmatively embrace it. They support it. Let me ask you, Mr. Grime, is discriminating based on race consistent with the United States Constitution?
No.
What does the 14th Amendment say about discrimination based on race?
It's prohibited.
What does the 15th Amendment say about discriminating based on race, and in particular drawing congressional lines and explicitly discriminating based on race?
It's prohibited.
Now, the Democrats are fond of telling this story that is, and I wish I could find a kinder way to say it, a flat-out lie. That without discriminating based on race, that no African Americans will be elected and no Hispanics will be elected. Indeed, there was one fellow online who was a vocal left-wing spokesperson who tweeted out, "If I'm advising anybody to run for president, they sure as hell better have a solution to how you make sure that it's not another 100 years before another black person can represent South Carolina." So that's a typical Democrat statement, that we cannot elect a black person in South Carolina without discriminating based on race. I want to ask you, Mr. Chamberlain, who is the junior senator from South Carolina right now?
That would be Tim Scott.
And, all right, I'll tell you what I said online. I said, hey, Grok, who is Tim Scott, and why do Democrats think he isn't black? And by the way, was Tim Scott elected because of a gerrymandered district drawn only to elect an African American?
No, he won statewide.
He won statewide. By the way, the Democrat position is you can only elect African Americans with a gerrymandered district. I will point out Burgess Owens, an African American, is elected in a majority white district in the state of Utah. He's a Republican. Byron Donalds, another African American, is elected in a majority white district in Florida. He is a Republican. John James, another African American, is elected in a majority white district in Michigan. He is a Republican. And my own congressman, Wesley Hunt, who represents me in the House of Representatives, he is elected in a majority white district. He is a Republican. And yet, in the Democrats' world, you're not black if you're not a liberal Democrat. There is an arrogance to African American voters. By the way, they also have that same arrogance to Hispanic voters. They say you're not Hispanic if you're not a liberal Democrat. Well, I'll tell you, I am proud to be the first Hispanic ever elected to represent the state of Texas in the United States Senate. And Mr. Chamberlain, in my election in Texas, was I elected in a gerrymandered district that could only elect an Hispanic?
No, you were elected statewide.
Discrimination based on race is wrong. Final question. The Democrats are now clutching their pearls that seats drawn to elect liberal Democrats in the South are going to go away. You may get black Republicans instead. Indeed, in Tennessee, they're freaking out that a liberal white guy who's a Democrat is likely going to lose his seat to an African-American woman who's a Republican, and they say that's horrible racial oppression. My final question is this. If you look nationwide, Which party has egregiously abused gerrymandering for decades? Both parties are guilty of it, but who has been the worst offender? And in particular, take New England. Take Massachusetts, take Connecticut, take Rhode Island, take Maine, take Vermont, take New Hampshire. How many Republicans are elected from all of New England in the House of Representatives?
I think the answer to that is zero.
Zero. They've drawn every district in a naked gerrymander, and yet they're very upset that their illegal pursuit of power has now been stopped by the Supreme Court that is enforcing the Constitution and prohibiting the racial gerrymandering and discrimination their party is built on.
Mr.
Senator
Chairman?
Padilla.
Just a
Mr. Chairman, part of personal privilege.
Sure.
I feel personally aggrieved to sit here and to be lectured by my colleague from Texas. And this reminds me of the time when he was first elected to the Senate, and the Judiciary Committee had a hearing on gun safety, and he felt a need to lecture Dianne Feinstein, who was a leader on gun safety legislation, and he took that opportunity to lecture Dianne Feinstein about gun safety and her leadership on the issue. And she said to him something along the lines of, I did not sit here on this committee for however many years she did, only to be lectured by you, and that is how I feel. So why don't you just stop lecturing the rest of us? Just because you think you are the smartest person in the world doesn't mean the rest of us agree to that, okay? Thank you.
Senator Hirono,
Senator-
I
Senator
knew
Cruz.
Dianne Feinstein. I served with Dianne Feinstein, and you're not Dianne Feinstein.
All right, Senator Padilla.
This hearing is not really about the Voting Rights Act. It is not really about gerrymandering. It is about two competing narratives of American history and two senators who are willing to tear into each other to defend their version of the truth. Senator Mazie Hirono opened with a classic progressive framing. Racial discrimination happened. It was terrible. The Voting Rights Act fixed it. And now the Supreme Court's conservative majority is gutting that fix, ushering in a new era of voter suppression. She pointed to the SAVE Act, which she called the Save Trump Act, designed to disenfranchise millions of married women and poor people who don't have birth certificates or passports. She pointed to the Attorney General demanding voter rolls from 29 states. She pointed to the Cala decision, which she said made the Voting Rights Act unenforceable because no state legislator is stupid enough to say out loud that they intend to racially discriminate. She asked a witness to put this moment into the historical context of John Lewis and the Pettus Bridge. The witness obliged. He talked about the people rising up. He said, we're being gaslit. He said the destruction of the Voting Rights Act is the penultimate destruction of our democracy. Then Senator Ted Cruz got the floor. And he did something Hirono did not expect. He didn't argue with her about whether voter suppression exists today. He didn't defend the SAVE Act or the Attorney General's demands. He went back in time. He took her words. We had poll taxes, we had literacy tests, we had jelly bean tests. And he asked a devastating question. Who is we? And he answered it. The Democrats. Every single racist policy Hirono named was implemented by Democrats. The poll taxes, Democrats. Literacy tests, Democrats. Jelly bean counting, Democrats. The Ku Klux Klan, founded by Democrats. Nathan Bedford Forrest, a delegate to the Democratic National Convention. Jim Crow laws, written by Democrats. Bull Connor, a Democrat. Cruz then contrasted that history with the Republican Party, founded to oppose slavery. Abraham Lincoln, the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. He wasn't just defending the court's decision. He was rewriting the framing of the entire hearing. Hirono wanted to talk about current voter suppression. Cruz wanted to talk about historical responsibility. And he made a compelling case that the party now accusing others of racism spent a century perfecting it. But Cruz didn't stop at history. He went to the present. He listed Black Republicans elected in majority white districts. Tim Scott, elected statewide in South Carolina. Burgess Owens in Utah. Byron Donalds in Florida. John James in Michigan. Wesley Hunt in Texas. And himself, the first Hispanic ever elected to the Senate from Texas, elected statewide, not in a gerrymandered Hispanic district. He asked the witnesses, is discriminating based on race consistent with the Constitution? No. What does the 14th Amendment say? Prohibited. The 15th? Prohibited. His point was simple. You don't need to draw race-based districts to elect minority candidates. It happens all the time. In fact, it happens more often when you let voters choose, not when you draw lines based on skin color. He then turned to New England. 6 states: Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire. How many Republicans in the House of Representatives? 0. 0. The party that screams about racial gerrymandering has perfected partisan gerrymandering to the point of eliminating the opposition entirely. And they are only upset now because the Supreme Court is taking away their ability to do the same thing with race. Then Hirono snapped. She asked for a point of personal privilege. She said she felt personally aggrieved. She invoked the memory of Dianne Feinstein, the late California senator, who once told Cruz not to lecture her. She told Cruz to stop lecturing the rest of us. And Cruz, without missing a beat, delivered the line of the hearing. I knew Dianne Feinstein. I served with Dianne Feinstein. And you're not Dianne Feinstein. It was brutal. It was dismissive. It was also true. Hirono tried to borrow Feinstein's authority, her seniority, her moral standing. Cruz refused to let her. He knew Feinstein. He served with her. He respected her, even when they disagreed. But Hirono is not Feinstein, and he wasn't going to pretend otherwise. The larger question at the heart of this hearing is whether race can ever be used as a factor in drawing political lines. The progressive answer is yes, to remedy past discrimination and ensure minority representation. The conservative answer is no, the Constitution is colorblind, and the ends do not justify the means. Neither side is going to convince the other. But Cruz made an effective case that the party demanding race-based districts now is the same party that imposed race-based discrimination for a century. And Hirono made an effective case that voter suppression is real and the Voting Rights Act is under threat. The difference is that Cruz backed up his argument with names, dates, and elections. Hirono backed up hers with rhetoric and a personal attack that fell flat. When the history of this hearing is written, people will remember 2 things: the list of Black Republicans elected in white districts, and Cruz's final line to Hirono. You're not Dianne Feinstein.